Remember this. Sometimes a single hug makes a decision that months of conversation never could. Yes, just a few seconds of physical contact. And within those few seconds, a woman silently decides one thing. Does she want to feel closer to you? Or does she want to stay away from you forever? Most men think a hug is just a normal gesture. Open your arms, step in, hold her, done. But the truth is far more dangerous than that. Because for a woman, a hug is never just physical contact. It becomes a silent psychological test. In that one moment, she feels, are you safe or are you pressuring her? Are you confident or desperate? Does your touch feel warm or uncomfortable? Are you creating connection or violating boundaries? And here's the unsettling part. Research published in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior shows that human beings make rapid judgments about comfort, closeness, and social intent within the first few moments of physical touch. Which means, before the hug is even fully over, her subconscious has already written a verdict about you. This felt good, or keep distance from him. And the problem is, most men make their biggest mistake at the exact moment they think they're being the most attractive. They hold too tightly. They keep it going too long. They let their touch carry a strange hunger. They think it creates chemistry. But inside her mind, it translates into something else. Neediness, control, social awkwardness, unsafe masculine energy. A touch that should have created comfort turns into a silent warning signal. And this is the exact moment many men don't just enter the friend zone. They enter invisible rejection. She'll still smile. She'll still act normal. But deep inside, her nervous system has already filed you under. And not again. You won't even know why the conversation starts dying, why the texts get colder, why the attraction suddenly disappears. Because the damage was done in that one hug. A bad hug isn't just awkward. It can be the first nail in the coffin of attraction. And today, we're exposing the deadly mistake almost every man makes, but almost nobody talks about. There are moments in life that seem small on the surface, almost insignificant. A glance, a tone of voice, a gesture that lasts only a few seconds. But sometimes, those small moments carry more meaning than we realize. They reveal something deeper, not just about the other person, but about us, about boundaries, about respect, about the unspoken dynamics that shape how we relate to one another. Something as simple as a hug can carry all of that. A hug can be warmth. It can be comfort. It can be comfort. It can be connection. It can say, ECU without a single word being spoken, but it can also be something else entirely when it's not grounded in awareness, when it ignores consent, when it becomes about taking rather than sharing. And that's where the truth begins to unfold. Because when you go to hug a woman, there is one thing you must never do, and it has nothing to do with technique and everything to do with intention. Never assume that your desire to connect is automatically shared. Never assume that closeness is welcome just because it feels natural to you. Never assume that familiarity, history, or even affection gives you access to someone else's physical space. Because that assumption, as subtle as it may seem, is where respect begins to break down. And in narcissistic dynamics, that breakdown doesn't always happen in loud or obvious ways. It often begins in moments just like this. Small, almost invisible moments where one person's boundaries are overlooked, minimized, or bypassed. You may not even notice it at first. You step in for a hug, expecting it to be returned. Maybe you've done it before. Maybe it feels routine. But what you don't pause to consider is how she feels in that moment, whether she's comfortable, whether she's in the emotional space to receive that kind of closeness. And if you don't notice, if you don't check in, that moment becomes less about connection and more about control. Not control in an aggressive sense, but in a subtle assumption that your intention overrides her autonomy. And that's where awareness matters. Because true connection is not about what you want to give, it's about what is mutually experienced, mutually respected, mutually chosen. In healthy interactions, even something as simple as a hug carries an unspoken understanding. There is a pause, a reading of the moment, a sensitivity to the other person's body language, their energy, their comfort. You don't just move toward them, you meet them where they are. But in unhealthy patterns, especially those influenced by narcissistic traits, that pause often doesn't exist. There is a kind of entitlement to closeness. A belief, sometimes unconscious, that physical affection is a given, not something to be shared through mutual consent. And when that happens, the hug is no longer about connection. It becomes about access. Access to someone else's space, their body, their emotional presence, without fully acknowledging their agency in that moment. Now, this doesn't mean that every unwanted hug is part of a larger, harmful pattern. But it does mean that these moments can reflect deeper dynamics when they are repeated, when they are dismissed, when they are not adjusted, even after discomfort is expressed. Because what matters is not just the action, it's the response to awareness. If someone pulls away slightly, do you notice? If there is hesitation, do you respect it? If there is a boundary, do you honor it without question? Or do you override it, minimize it, make it about your intention rather than their experience? That distinction is everything. Because respect is not measured by what you think you meant. It is measured by how you respond when someone shows you what they need. And this is where emotional clarity begins to deepen. Because for many women, especially those who have experienced emotionally manipulative or narcissistic dynamics, physical gestures like hugs are not always neutral. They carry memory, they carry context, they carry the weight of past experiences where boundaries may not have been respected. So when you approach that space without awareness, without sensitivity, you may unknowingly step into something that is more complex than it appears. And this is not about blame. It's about understanding. Understanding that connection requires presence. Understanding that presence requires awareness. And understanding that awareness requires you to step outside of your own assumptions and into a space where the other person's experience matters just as much as your intention. Because when you do that, something shifts. The hug is no longer something you initiate without thought. It becomes something you share, something that happens naturally, comfortably, without pressure. And that kind of connection feels different. It feels safe. It feels mutual. It feels real. But let's take this a step deeper. Because in narcissistic dynamics, physical affection can sometimes be used in ways that are not immediately obvious. A hug can become a way to reestablish closeness after conflict without addressing what actually happened. It can be used to bypass difficult conversations, to smooth over tension without resolving it. It can create a moment of connection that feels good in the short term, but leaves underlying issues untouched. And over time, this creates confusion. Because you may start to associate physical closeness with emotional resolution, even when nothing has truly changed. You may feel a sense of relief in that moment, only to find yourself back in the same pattern later. And this is where awareness becomes essential. Because true connection cannot exist without emotional accountability. A hug cannot replace a conversation. It cannot repair what has not been acknowledged. It cannot create safety if safety has been repeatedly compromised. And when you begin to understand that, your relationship with physical affection changes. You start to see it not as a substitute for connection, but as an extension of it, something that reflects what is already present, not something that creates the illusion of it. And this awareness is not just important for how you interact with others. It is equally important for how you understand your own boundaries. If you are someone who has often felt obligated to accept physical affection, even when it didn't feel right, this is your moment of clarity. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step back without explanation, because your comfort is not something that needs to be negotiated. It is something that deserves to be respected. And as you begin to honor that within yourself, something powerful happens. You start to reconnect with your own sense of agency. You begin to trust your instincts again. You recognize that your body often knows what your mind is still trying to process. And that recognition becomes a form of empowerment. Because it brings you back to yourself, back to your boundaries. So, back to your right to choose what feels safe, what feels welcome, what feels aligned. And for those who are learning to show up with greater awareness, this is where growth happens, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent shifts, in the way you pause before stepping into someone's space. So, in the way you notice their response, in the way you respect their boundaries without taking it personally. Because when you can do that, you are no longer operating from assumption. You are operating from presence, and presence is what creates real connection. It is what allows both people to feel seen, respected, and valued, not just for what they give, but for who they are. And this extends far beyond a single moment. It shapes how you communicate, how you listen, how you engage in relationships as a whole. Because once you understand that connection is not something you take, but something you co-create, everything begins to shift. You become more attentive, more thoughtful, more aware of the impact your actions have, even in the smallest ways. And that awareness builds something deeper than surface-level interaction. It builds trust. The kind of trust that is not assumed, but earned through consistency, through respect, through a willingness to see and honor the other person's experience, even when it differs from your own. And in that space, connection becomes something entirely different. Not something you reach for impulsively, but something that unfolds naturally when both people feel safe enough to meet in that moment. And that is where true intimacy begins, not in the act itself, but in the awareness behind, in the understanding that every interaction, no matter how small, carries meaning. And that meaning is shaped not just by what you do, but by how consciously you do it.